Hey, here's Secret Force 25 again. Took me a while to finish this guide because of the information I needed to gather. I needed to test a lot, so I don't give wrong information here. So yeah, it's gonna be an in-depth guide about every symbol there is currently in our version, what changes are gonna be there on the Russian server, and how useful it's gonna be for different classes, how you can use them, bugs that are included, and just durations and cooldowns that are not listed on the tooltips. So yeah, I will go still through everything just to explain stuff. So bonus dash increases 1 dash charge per level. It increases your dash count up to 5 if you have both levels that are there. It's useful for speedruns and classes that have special dashes like the Witch or the Cryomancer or the Monk. It's useful for PvP, for example, if you have one of those long dashes and the Berserker's on your ass as a witch, you can get away, you can kite him, even so he is the character who does not let go that easily, especially with the whirlwind bug sucking you back in even so you dashed. So yeah, very needed for PvP and useful for speedruns. Second one is slowing attacks. Slowing attacks has 3 levels, all behind pink nodes, very expensive to go for, but every kind of attack, even dots, anything, procs it by up to 100% proc chance. So you have 10% or up to 30% slow every time you attack, lasts for 3 seconds, has a 6-second internal cooldown, so its downtime is 3 seconds as well, so the uptime is 50%. The cooldown is only per target, so if you have AoE targets, everyone can be you have multiple targets, everyone can be CC'd at different times if you want to. Not recommended, so because you want to CC everything at the same time. So it's good for pack-to-pack clearing. If you go, for example, in the raid from one pack to the next, it's nice because you can slow them, and that works well with ruthlessness, because you do additional damage. It's only 2%, but still adds up with everything else. So yeah, it's definitely worth a try to combine those two, slowing attacks and ruthlessness. Also very good for PvP, for kiting, for ranged classes. Not that good for melee class because it can fuck up with your combinations, with your attack combinations in melee. The next is Summon Oculate. Summon Oculate has 2 levels. It lasts for either 18 seconds or 25 seconds. I couldn't test so far what the cooldown is, if it's like 25 seconds cooldown, so you can have 100% uptime with second level or not. But here are some things that you might want to know. Once you spawn it, any AoE buff, so energy shower, the light band ultimate, stuff like that will affect the Oculate. Only single target buffs cannot be applied to it because those work only on players and not on creatures. It has an own targetable icon, it's a targetable entity in PvE and PvP, so boss mechanics can be cheesed by it because, like for example, the second boss in the raid can lift the Oculate instead of a player. In PvP, Oculates have insane amount of HP, so they're quite useful if you combine it with the Necro Snake, and everyone has it. For example, you have 3 people, you have 6 minions that do a lot of damage accumulated and combined, and they also block the vision, so it's not that easy to target for the people. Also, tap targeting still takes a few seconds time off, so it's not too bad. Still, wouldn't go for it early on. It's for later. Impulse intensity increases increases passively the impulse damage by 10%. Directly shows it on your character tab on the equipment page. Next one is maximum recoil. Critical damage is increased by 10%, same as impulse intensity, and also ultimate strength is the same. All of them have 6 levels. Only difference is mobilization, because tempo increases bonus damage by 10%. Or by up to 50% passively, so the mobilization only works on the base tempo. It's valor damage, not on the tempo. Then we have Warrior's Creed. Warrior's Creed is a passive skill, it's always active. It's used for every DPS class in PvE because you shouldn't take damage, so the downside of it shouldn't affect you at least. It's useful for burst and DPS classes in PvE. For example, it's not good for the monk because the monk, it has its burst, but it's more about going in and out, and if you're going in and you take too much damage, you cannot go back in. So I wouldn't recommend it for the monk, but for other class, for burst classes on the ranged, I would definitely go for it, because yeah, I mean, it depends on your playstyle. I would go for it. It's up to you. The other thing is Protector's Creed. Protector's Creed is also passive ability. It's useful for tank classes and Lightbinders in PvE, because Lightbinders don't get to hit, so they don't need increased damage. It doesn't affect the reduced damage, doesn't affect Lightbinders because they just don't hit. It's useful for every class in PvP as well, so you can choose between reducing the damage or increasing your damage. I wouldn't recommend it on an archer server, because the archer needs to one-shot people to be useful in PvP, because that's the archer's thing. So if you reduce the damage by 5%, that would be hurting you more than you would gain. Next one is Pain Shock. Sorry. It has a proc chance of around 50%, maybe even more. It is shown as an E on your screen. It's an E skill. If you have like a Witch, Envoys of Taint, it's also an E skill. What's the difference is Pain Shock has a higher priority. So Pain Shock will always be on top unless the target is in range for your finishing strike. Then your finishing strike will have higher priority. Also, a benefit from Pain Shock is it increases the higher your stats are, the higher your prestige is. It has no animation. It doesn't stop your combination, so it can be used, for example, in the Paladin. 2 left clicks, 1 right mouse button, it would be 1 combination. You can use it after 2 left clicks and still use your right mouse button afterward, so it doesn't cancel your combination. It's just a skill that does damage, and combined with Paralyzing Shock even stuns the target. It's very useful early on. Later on it will sadly proc, or maybe luckily proc, the Pally symbol, so you can either use it to proc the symbol later on, or already right now to damage the target. It's not bad either way. So then you have Wave Damage combined with Wave Slow. Both of them same proc chance, same priority as Pain Shock, Paralyzing Shock, lower priorities and finishing strikes. It can be used in between the combinations. It is sadly a low damage skill, so it's not that great for PvE. It has a quite small range with 8 yards only, or 8 meters. I would use it only in combination with Wave Slow and Ruthlessness for PvP and PvE, because of the slow effects increasing the damage for Ruthlessness. So it's not completely useless, but I wouldn't recommend it. Like, it's on a definitely lower end of the tier list. Next one is Lucky Shot. It's a passive ability. It can increase your crit chance not up to 100%, only at 50%. It's pretty much useless for every class except of the Archer, because of the initial high damage skill. Any other class doesn't really use high damage skills before any other skills, except of maybe the Slayer, but then again, really not recommended. It's a very, very minor damage increase. Nothing compared to Lacerated Wound or any other symbol, pretty much. Then you have Double Discharge. Double Discharge is a bit tricky. Double Discharge has a chance of a proc of 12% or 24% if you have both levels unlocked. What it means though is that it can only proc every 10 seconds or down to 6 seconds depending on your discharge recovery. So the 12% or 24% maybe sounds not too bad, but because of the time it has in between to only proc once, meaning 10 seconds, it makes it really, really low proc chance. Other than that, it doesn't increase your impulse charge up to 2, it's just shown as a buff icon on your bar. It does not have a duration, so you can keep it even out of fights. The only thing, you cannot change regions with it, so you cannot keep it for whatever reason you would. But you can have it there for limitless time, pretty much. It does have no internal cooldown, so you can have discharge recovery up to 40%. Your impulse recharges every 6 seconds then, and then can proc every 6 seconds, possibly. So, another thing, about double discharge with Lightbinder combined. Lightbinder has an offhand that makes you recharge one impulse charge. So that means if you on your Lightbinder, if you're playing a Lightbinder and you press your 1 button, it will use up an impulse charge and give you another one directly. But double discharge has a higher priority than the skill has. So you would take away the double discharge icon, you would gain the refresh, but because impulse charges are limited to 1 only, it will only put it up to 1. If you try to use it again, the offhand has the 7 seconds internal cooldown or 6 seconds, so you couldn't use it again. So if you're a Lightbinder, you don't want to use your right mouse button with it, because you would waste the double discharge pretty much. You need to use another skill to proc double discharge, and then you can use your right mouse button, for example. Then you have Element of Surprise. Element of Surprise has 3 levels. It's a passive ability. It starts as soon as you go into combat and refreshes as soon as you go out of combat. So you can have it from every pack to pack pull. You can have it on bosses, whatever. It's very useful for the damage boost in the beginning, because most of the rotations, most of the compositions work around an early burst damage, especially in short fights like in the raids. Later on for distortions it's not gonna be that great, but it's still a 36% damage increase combined with all the other buffs, which is not additive but multiplicative. So it's really strong to increase the early boost and should not be underestimated for sure. Next skill is Inertia. Inertia has 2 levels. It's currently not working, it's bugged. You get the buff applied, but it's not mitigating any damage. Rapid Attack, it says it lasts for the first 3 seconds after the dash is used, and that's pretty much what it does. As soon as you start dashing, it's not after the dash is actually used, but as soon as you use the dash. So, you'll only end up with a 2-second buff pretty much. It cannot be stacked up, it can be refreshed, so. Because of the game works with snapshotting, meaning you get buffs and then you can apply damage and it does get calculated with a buff even so the buff is out. You can use Rapid Attack for Murder of Crows, for example. So the Murder of Crows on a witch would still be buffed, so Rapid Attack is not entirely useless, just not that great either. Also, I'm not sure if it works compared to Inertia, because it's only 6% damage increase, so it's not really that easy to notice. Unless you have both levels, 12% would be noticeable, but I only have 1 sadly. Breakout, I have no idea about it. I never got it, I never got to test it, so I don't know the range it has. So I will add that once I have it or once I know about it. Clever Maneuver. The time starts as soon as you dash. It sadly doesn't last 3 seconds, because if you have Clever Maneuver and dash activation, Clever Maneuver and Inertia active, I'll show you in a second, you dash, but a second early off, even though it should have the same time. You see this? It runs out earlier. I'm not sure why that is, but yeah, it's apparently not exactly 3 seconds, but a bit less. Also, it doesn't stack, meaning only 1 shield can be active at a time. Only 1 shield can be active at a time because it's from the same skill. So if you have 2 Lightbinders and 1 Lightbinder shields you and the other one shields you, only the higher shield should be active. So this means that if you have a shield active, you take damage to that shield, it's half HP, and you dash, it wouldn't refresh the shield because the maximum amount would be the same. So you have to wait till the shield is either down or the buff is ran out. Then you can dash again and you will get a new shield applied. So really keep that in mind if you try to neglect dot damage or anything. Wait for the shield to be gone, or it will be useless and you waste the dash. The symbol itself is useful for every class. I would definitely take it. Like, you get it early on, so why not take it? It's not a wasted slot for any class. Can be a lifesaver, especially in PvP. Then you have Desperate Resistance. Desperate Resistance has 2 levels. It's a passive ability. It's not a plain 15% slow immunity, so it reduces 15% of the slow amount. So if you have 70% slow applied to you, it only reduces the 70% by 15%, which would be 10.5%. So you would end up with a 59.5% slow and not with a 55% slow, because it's not a plain 15%. Other than that, it's useful in PvP because most of the slows are at least 50% and can go up to 70%. But it's not something you should prioritize. It should be one of your later symbols for sure. And it's useless in PvE because you usually don't get slowed, and even if you have enemies that slow, it's not something you should be standing in anyways. Next symbol is Balance. Balance is a passive ability. It's useful for tanks in PvE because trash packs usually contain at least 3 targets, and it's very useful for every class in PvP because the smallest PvP is 3 versus 3. Sure, you have 2v1 situations, 2v2 situations, but in the beginning it's still a 6% damage mitigation. Not sure if it's working, haven't tested it out so far. I will add that information once I got to test it and it actually reduces damage or not. Next one is Ruthlessness, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's a passive ability. It's very good in combination with Wave Slow, as I said before, or it can be used in combination with Archer talent, which increases the damage against stun targets from the electric fence, for example, by 20%. So instead of 20% from the Archer only, you would increase the damage up to 26 or 32% because of the second level. And you can use it in combination with the Monk as well, so that's another 20%. And yet again, it's not additive, it's multiplicative, so you have 6% increase up to the 20%. It's not 26%, it's a bit different. Also, it will be changed later on to 7% increased damage to stunned, feared, blind, or immobilized targets instead of 6%. The 2% stay the same. It's definitely worth a shot for PvP. I would have it already, but I went more for PvE instead of PvP. Then the next one, Painful Spasms. Painful Spasms. It's a dot. It gets applied every time you inflict impulse damage. It's a third of your spirit every second of damage. Later on it will be buffed up to 200%. So you would do it gets buffed because you only apply it every 10 seconds or 6 seconds, or if you have double discharge, even faster. But usually people don't do that, so that's why it got buffed. It's a very strong dot, same as Lacerated Wound. For PvP I would definitely take it as Lightbinder because Lightbinders do go for Strength Spirit, and that's pretty much the only class you should go for, unless you go for a dot build. Then yes, you can go Painful Spasms, Double Discharge, Lacerated Wound combined to just apply a lot of dots to kite the enemies. That does work. Not recommended though, for most classes at least. Other than that, it lasts for 3 seconds, it can be refreshed, and that's it. Oops, sorry for that. Lacerated Wound is the next one. It gets applied by critical damage. It does a sort of your luck as damage per second. It can be refreshed but not stacked, so if you crit multiple times it may refresh the Lacerated Wound, but it will not stack up, so you don't do like 2 times your crit, 2 times your luck as damage per second. Also very useful for dot classes in PvP and very strong for every class that goes for strength luck. And you have Forced Respite. It has 1 level, it's a passive ability. I sadly don't have it, I didn't test it, so I don't know if it would work with slowing attacks. For example, if someone would apply slowing attacks, do you still have every single time it applies a 20% chance to recharge a dash? Because then that would be totally broken and a total counter, not even just a counter for slowing attacks, but you would benefit from it because you would gain a dash charge like almost every time. So yeah, I think it has an internal cooldown, but I cannot guarantee you that, so that's why I'm gonna skip this. Then Defense Reflex is next, has 2 levels, it's a passive ability. It's very needed for PvP because it's the damage mitigation for archers and berserkers by 20% because of the 2 levels. as almost all of their damage is combined with CC effects. So definitely take it if you're going for PvP. It's okay for tanks in PvE as well, because sometimes you get CC'd, but it's really not needed. It just should be taken later on because there are not too many tank symbols. But if you're a PvP player, definitely go for it. Adrenaline Surge, I didn't try it out, so I just know that they're gonna change something about it on the Russian server, but I also don't know what it is. Impulse Barrier. Impulse Barrier is a symbol every class should have early on. It's a very good mitigation skill. It has no cooldown, it does not stack the shield, but it's the same as Clever Maneuver. So if you have double discharge, if you have if you have double discharge, you can use the second discharge after the shield ran out and you will have another shield. So it is very strong, especially in PvP. I would definitely pick it up. Everyone can take it because it's on the way to Mark of Death, just a little bit up. If you're going the lower way, which is definitely worth it, or it's on the upper way anyway, so take it with you. Impact, passive ability. It has a 100% proc chance whenever you crit and it's not on cooldown, it will CC someone. It's the most broken symbol currently for PvP. It's not that great for PvE because it would stagger the creature, so if you're doing a speedrun it would slow it down. If you're not doing a speedrun, if you're doing, for example, just raids and not pulling everything together, then it might be worth it because the additional CC, but I wouldn't go for it in PvE. It's definitely just a PvP symbol. Later on it will be nerfed on the Russian server. It will do 2-second stun, but it has a 12-second internal cooldown, so it will be just a tiny nerf, to be honest. It's still very strong there as well. Then the next one is Mark of Death. Mark of Death. Sounds amazing, sadly it's currently bugged, so I will go into details on that. It has around a 30 to 40% proc chance, it has a 30 seconds cooldown. It has what it does, it applies a 6-second debuff or buff, depending on how you want to see it, on the target. It accumulates the damage you do during that time while it's active, and it will apply 20% of the damage you do and only you do, not your teammates, nothing like that, only your damage, 20% of it as soon as the debuff runs out. It works with Biotrap together, so 45% damage increase, that's nice, and it does not work with anything else, like the damage doesn't get increased by something else. But the damage you do will get increased, so it's nice to have. Also, other than that, it's currently bugged, as I said. If multiple people have Mark of Death and it gets applied at the same time, it's active at the same time on the targets, then only the very first applied Mark of Death will do damage. The other ones will be there, they will run out of time and they will do no damage. So if you're doing raids with high burst damage, with short fights, you want to have the Witch with Mark of Death because it gets applied with Volatile Curse, it works well together. So Volatile Curse in the first raid does around 1.5 million damage, 20% of that is 300,000 damage just from that, so it's very useful on a Witch. If you're not in a raid, if you don't have high burst in the raid, you want to have a kinetic habit because it lines up perfectly with the sledgehammer combination, 30 seconds, you can line it up with energy shower of the alchemist if you have multiple ones, so it does a lot of damage. You just have to utilize it pretty much. Other than that, it will be changed later on. Currently there's only one level available, later it will be 3 levels available, but it will be nerfed a little bit. It will be 15%, 22.5% and 30%. So in the end it's more, but first you have to gain all 3 levels. Next symbol is Glorious Triumph. It is pretty much exactly how it works, how it states there. Has to my knowledge, no internal cooldown, so it can be used with a monk. Monk has 90% chance, something like that, to reduce their finishing strike cooldown. So you could theoretically have Glorious Triumph use active on a monk all the time. That's good. Allows you to speedrun stuff. Later on it will be changed a little bit. You will get 15% increased damage and 15% reduced damage, and the duration will be nerfed to 8 seconds. Next one is Life Energy. Life Energy is a very strong symbol, despite the opinion of a lot of people. It's a passive ability. It's strong for PvP, but also in PvE you have some distortions which are needed for you to get specific points at a very short amount of time. So popping a healing orb at that point just for the running speed is already worth it if you have cooldowns on your other running movement speed increasing buffs, like for example the Alchemist, the Lightbinder, the Berserker, the Kinetic. Also later on it will be changed, it will be buffed. The reduced incoming damage will be increased up to 40% instead of 30%. Next is consumable efficiency. Duration of the positive effects of consumable is increased by 12% and 24%. I think only right now it has only one level. I would have to double check, give me a second. Yeah, I think it only has one level. Sorry for the double checking. Yeah, no, it has one level. If not, I will add it later on. So yeah, it's useful for PvP on most of the classes. Also for Pantheon Wars it will be definitely needed because you will use a lot of those consumables. Then recharging consumables. Common consumables recharge 15 or 30% faster. In my opinion it's really not that great, unless it works later on with the crafted scrolls, meaning a specialization of the god mode can craft scrolls that will increase your damage output, your movement speed, stuff like that significantly, and it only recharges out of combat, so I'm not sure if the recharging consumables will work on them. If they do, it's useful later on. If not, they're gonna be staying useless. Next one is tactical defense. Tactical defense is one I cannot really say a lot about because melee and range defense is only for PvP, but I assume it's currently not working, which is the reason why defense penetration is not working, because there is no defense to penetrate. Of course I could be wrong, but I tested it a lot. I mean, it's up to you if you want to believe it. I really don't believe the tactical defense is working. I will try next week when I have my melee defense ring, if it's the defense itself or if it's a symbol, but for now I would not take tactical defense. Next one is Instant Ice. Instant Ice is a Cryomancer class symbol, so once you max out the Cryomancer you will have that. It only contains of one level of course, because you can not max it more often than once. It procs from any sort of damage done to you. It must be damage done to you obviously of course. So even dots applied to you will proc it, as long as the target is within 5 meters from you. It only roots the target so the target can still damage you if he's ranged, so that makes this symbol fairly useless, because melee class usually have a CC break, like the Berserker can use their leap, the Monk has a CC break, the Paladin has CC immunity, the Kinetic is ranged, so yeah, most of the classes either have ranged attacks or have CC immunity, so it's really not a good symbol to go for anyone. Definitely worth going as the last class, because you need the symbol slots. So Divine Intervention, Paladin class symbol, only one level, same reason as before. It procs from 10% higher damage than your max HP. It will neglect that damage skill as well, so it's not after it. After you take the damage you apply the immunity, but before that, which is nice. And it refreshes every time you go out of combat, so every pack, every trash pack you pull, every boss fight, you will have it ready, which makes this symbol one of the best symbols and definitely needed for every class. We, for example, in Fixed Internally do not allow anyone into distortions if he doesn't have the Paladin symbol by then, which a lot of guilds are gonna do, by the way. Then you have Shroud of Light. Shroud of Light is a Lightbinder class symbol. It's symbol which is not that great unless you're maybe a monk or a kinetic. The reason for it is immunity does not make you restore during the combat. If you're immune to damage, what immunity means, for example if you have the Sacred Barrier open or the Paladin Aegis of Light, all it does is it mitigates 100% of the damage, but the game still counts as if you would have taken damage. So, The 6 seconds out of combat or during combat where you take no damage only count if you really take no damage at all. No hits are gonna be applied to you, nothing. So that's the reason why Monk is not too bad, because they stay on their pole, they're untargetable during that time. Slayer and Invulnerability untargetable while they're invis. If they have a dot on them, so it should still not refresh the shield. And yeah, Kinetic, their ultimate, for example. But then again, same thing for the Slayer as for the Slayer. If they have a dot on them, they still take damage. Other than that, it can only refresh 1 shield apparently during the combat and not up to 3 shields. It's not the great symbol. It's not a good symbol to go for. The class itself is very useful, so I wouldn't neglect the class itself. Then you have the Berserker symbol. Bloodiness. It's a passive ability. It's not recommended to go for because it has a very low proc chance as another class if you're not a Berserker. Any other class gets a 20% damage boost. Sounds amazing. It has no cooldown. Sounds amazing. But the proc chance at 100% HP is really low. So for you would have to get a low HP and then either take no damage anymore or you would die. So questionable. It's up to you. Definitely wouldn't take it before Alchemist, Kinetic, Witch, Archer, stuff like that increase your damage by a lot more. Next is Cold Calculation. Cold Calculation is the Archer symbol. It's passive. It's got nerfed from 15% down to 12%. It's already active. If you have the German client or even the French client, I think there is one, it will still say 15% just because the translation is not done correctly on those versions yet. It's actually only 12%. Should be used for every class, both for PvE and PvP. If you're doing damage, it's great. My Cover of Darkness is the Slayer passive. It's useful for every Strength Luck class as a later symbol. I wouldn't recommend it early on Because Archer, Kinetic, Witch all outdo the damage increase from Under Cover of Darkness. Ghostly Viper is a Necro symbol. It's the same as Summon Oculate. It can be buffed by AoE buffs, it cannot be targeted by single target buffs. It can be targeted by creatures though to cheese boss mechanics. It's useful for PvP because it's unkillable due to the insane amount of HP. It has no cooldown, so after 20 seconds it can proc again with a 70% proc chance. So you could have it possibly 100% uptime pretty much. So it only attacks the target after it's spawned once you attack it again. So if you stop attacking a target, it will not attack that target, even so you're in combat with it. That's also what I forgot about balance. If you have, it says when they are fighting against 3 or more enemies. So if you're in PvP, you would actually have to use an AoE ability to get into combat with all the targets. Else it does not get applied. Active defense, I will have no idea. It's a useless symbol. There's no way you stay still in a fight for that long. So don't take it at all. Invincible Will is the Knight's symbol. It is a passive ability, as you can see. It gets 15% or 30% below 50% HP CC reduction. It's not that great as you might think it is for PvP, because a lot of CCs are only like a millisecond long, like the staggering of the Archer, the staggering of the Berserker, meaning you don't really reduce the CC effect at all. But still, it's not completely neglectable. I would take it after the damage boosts. But yeah. In Stolen Initiative, its damage to stunned opponents is increased by 20%. It works great in combination with Ruthlessness because that's up to 34% damage increase, which it's not additive, so it's a bit more than that. It's also awesome for PvP because PvP is all around CCing targets and killing them while they are CC'd. So damage increase is not too bad, but this is for PvP players or later on for PvE and PvP players. Strength Serum. Strength Serum does not get a nerf. It stays at 15%, has around a 60 to 70% proc chance, it has 42 seconds cooldown, and it instantly refreshes once you leave combat, so you can have it every trash pack ready. It's very useful in every damage class. I would just not pick it in before you have the kinetic maxed. Questionable about the Archer or the Alchemist symbol. I just preferred the Alchemist symbol because of the class I'm playing. Then you have Jinx. Jinx is a Warlock symbol. It is very much needed for if you're playing a Warlock and every other class. It's the strongest dot pretty much in the game. It can refresh endlessly, it has no cooldown, it has a very high proc chance with 30 to 40%. It has, it can crit, so it can reapply Lacerated Wound, which can reapply Jinx in my assumption, but I'm not entirely sure about that. But yeah, it's based on your stats as well. You see it 635 to 1200 damage, which is a lot. Like, it's really not a symbol you should neglect at all. It's gonna be one of the main symbols for PvP, your main damage symbol for PvP later on for sure. So yeah, that's it. That's about all the symbols in the game right now. I might add that once they release the new symbols for the Russian server on our servers as well. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you follow me on Twitch, Skyforge25, it's in the description. And yeah, hope to see you in game.